Well, good morning, everybody. I want to start off today by just kind of getting into the latest guidance we have on Erin. I know a lot of you in the Southeast are very concerned about this, and so let's take a look at it. This is some satellite data from the last several hours or so looking at what is going on in the tropics. And this wave here is the one we're talking about. So yesterday had some deeper convection in it there, and then lost it in the overnight hours, which is common at this time of development of a system like this. And then we're starting to see some deeper pools of convection reform. And Erin is expected to intensify quite quickly over the next 3 to 4 days, becoming a hurricane, eventually a major hurricane. The question remains is, does it get to the Lesser or Greater Antilles, the Bahamas, Bermuda, or the East Coast of the United States? Or does it even make it over into the Gulf? There were some early model runs that took it into the Gulf. Now, speaking of the Gulf, at the end of this forecast video, I want to talk to you about some things I think we need to be paying attention to late in the hurricane season. It's going to be the Gulf and the Caribbean. Now, recent memory is what's driving this worry, okay? And the recent memory from 2024 was the Bermuda high, which is going to steer Erin, okay? Last year, in September, the Bermuda high left its home in Bermuda and went way over here, closer to the Cape Verde Islands. I mean, the Azores. I mean, it was away. It was almost on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And I think, coming back to a theme I always have in my forecast videos during summer, where is that Bermuda high going to be as we transition out of summer to fall? So let's keep all of that in mind as we go forward, because that will ultimately drive the temperature and precipitation discussion for the United States going forward. So the latest we have on Erin right now is that still tropical storm expected to stay that way for a while, but as it gets over these warmer waters, the lower wind shear environment, we expect it to intensify pretty quickly, becoming our first major hurricane. And we do see there are areas to be watched down in the Caribbean and in the Gulf, like the Bay of Campeche, where there is still some deeper tropical convection, but the big story is going to be where Erin is going to go. So I just want to get right to it. This morning's ECMWF model runs have this system, I think, pegged to go toward Bermuda and miss the East Coast. Now, we will continue to watch the evolution of this, but it comes down to a simple story. What's coming across the northern tier of the United States? Where is high pressure going to sit? And one other thing, to be honest with you, this is all linked up with like strength of the southwest monsoon, because that's determined by high pressure as well. And the latest evidence we've got, both from the European ensemble and from the GFS ensemble, is to keep this system out to open ocean. Now, one of the GFS ensemble members has this getting over here toward, actually two of them do, have this approaching, southern Florida, between Cuba and Florida, going through the Bahamas, which is why we're still not out of the woods yet on saying that this system is going to, do this and not do that. So we just have to be vigilant, watch it, understand the dynamics around it, and just keep an eye on it. But the most overwhelming evidence on this hurricane is kind of shown here. I'm going to flip over to the European artificial intelligence because we haven't looked at that one yet. Erin is expected to be very intense, but at this point, even the AI model, which is entirely statistics-based, has it staying out to open ocean and missing the U.S. Now, of course, if that changes, we will analyze it, we'll tell you about it, and it'll be at the forefront of each of our forecasts. But that's what we're keeping an eye on. Now, what's helping do all of this is just take a look at the expansiveness of the Bermuda high here. Okay, see that? And then you can also see the higher pressure that's going to be over the south and west. And there's even high pressure that's sitting here. These are all like barricades, if you will. The hurricanes have to steer in between them. They don't push through high pressure cells. They orbit them. They go around them. So we're just going to keep an eye on it and see how this pattern ultimately works out. And we're curious at the very end if something sweeps into the across the northern tier of the United States to grab Erin, make it a much deeper cyclone, and pull it out here into the North Atlantic. Some of the storm systems are doing it. Look at the size of this in the AIFS, just ripping here into the North Atlantic. This could be a significant event for the British Isles if you're just taking a look at it here. So that's the latest I've got for you. And you're going, whoa, what is that? I'm like, I don't care what this is. This is an artifact out there at 300, where's our forecast hour? 312 hours. So we're just going to have to understand that the models do this, and we'll keep a close eye on it. We had much better guidance on Erin, and that's what we're going to continue watching. Okay, back in the U.S., just a couple things to take note of here. We saw some much needed rain get into pockets of the eastern Corn Belt. We've watched drought develop in this quarter. It's actually got all the way back down here to east central Illinois. There's been drier pockets in parts of Indiana and in the Mid-South, and we've also watched those storms thankfully move through parts of the Red River Valley, which were going quite dry there recently as well. At the end of this animation, as you also see the deeper convection down here in the southeast, okay, we still see quite a bit more smoke. And yesterday we were just keeping an eye on some of the monsoonal thunderstorms in the southwest, the smoke that's still orbiting around the Four Corner states, and some new fires that have shown up here on satellite as you look through parts of Washington, and of course ongoing fires throughout other western U.S. states. So it brings me back to something that I think we should just understand a little bit better. I made this map on Monday, but it's still quite valid. And I didn't get a good chance to explain it to you, so I will take 2 seconds and do this. It's the last 60 days we're looking at solar radiation anomalies. Now, sometimes these numbers don't make a ton of sense. A watt per meter square is a flux, so this is amount of energy per second passing through a square meter. And those numbers are not just familiar everyday talking points that most people have. So what I want to point out to you is that over this 60-day time period where these values approach like 20, that's like a 10% loss of solar radiation, sun, okay? And we have some places that get beyond that. And so when we start thinking about the influences on the lack of sunlight, we need to understand that we've shut this. It's essentially like we've knocked the sun down about 90% of its effort, all right? And that's the way to think about it. In some places, maybe 80% of its effort, and that is what's been influencing some of the troubles we've seen in pockets in the United States. Okay, so just wanted to put some numbers on that. Also, I hope you loved Matt's calculation of how much daylight we're losing in the energy compared to a light bulb. I love it. That's great science there. All right, so with all that, let's come back to where we've been. I wanted to show you again the radar animation to complement that satellite data you just saw, and some of the rains that moved through parts of eastern Corn Belt. Some of this came with some severe wind. There was some damage here in this region, but good convection. This was great to see that frontal boundary able to lift some of that moist air and get it into these places. But if we look at this overall, the last couple of weeks, this was a very dry, portion of the United States. And I can include more of northern Wisconsin, parts of Minnesota in that as well. And we saw this dryness extending through Arkansas, pockets of Texas. In between was where we had all the really wet weather, which is kind of in that same corridor we've talked about forever. And then also we had the flooding. Remember, this was last week that came into parts of Georgia, North and South Carolina. But it's to make a point that there is some significant dryness. And as the sun's rising here, I'm in Martin, Tennessee today, which is right here. Going to go over to the University of Tennessee, Martin, in a little while here. Give a talk with my good friend, Dr. Dave Colby. A lot of fun. But this is one of the drier spots in the Mid-South, and so we need to watch to see if we're going to fill some of this in. Now, the other component of this flow is that we're deep into August. We should be watching much bigger surges of monsoonal flow come into this area. Now, there have been storms, but it has been a very, very lackluster year in terms of the monsoon in the Southwest, which is quite disappointing in the forecast, but telling on the way that this particular pattern is setting up. So I did want to pull something up here. The statistics year on date in Martin, Tennessee, we are way above historical averages. 56, well, let's go right here to the current day, 55.18 inches, average is 33. So you'd come here and you go, man, this place should be underwater, and it's not, because a lot of this rainfall was back in one massive event in early April, and it flatlined after that. They had good rains at times in May and June, and even in early July. But just take a look at this. This is this time period recently where pockets of the Mid-South have just flattened out on precipitation. And yes, I will be releasing this product on Ag Weather soon. I'm just going through the redesign with you right now. So, folks, later today, just going to tell you do have a little bit of forecasted rainfall, but it's not coming through anytime soon. You're going to keep on this drier stretch for a little while here as we go forward. All right, what is forward? Okay, I'm starting to see a little bit of an issue, I think, going on in the Pacific. And you can see it here. This is not, it doesn't fully look like a blocked pattern, but there's going to be high pressure that sits over the Aleutian Islands, low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska. And I think, generally speaking, we're going to watch a ridge back itself back up to this area. Most of the models are trying to do that, but it doesn't look terribly strong, but it's there. This is going to change up a couple of things for us, and the precipitation pattern that results from this is going to be hard to diagnose. But we are going to be seeing cooler air at times try to get through the Great Lakes into the Northeast. That has changed in the last 24 hours in the model runs. It's now not as cool as we saw before, but I think it's going to be important to watch the evolution of this. So we do have a pretty vigorous trough going right back over those Canadian wildfires. Do it. Make it happen. Get these fires out. And late this week, this is going to start us off with some severe risk here and move it into the Red River Valley of the North by the time we get into Friday. But big ridge sets up here over parts of like Illinois, Missouri. Matt talked quite a bit about that. While a much deeper trough settles into the northwest, we're going to see increased precipitation here because of that. But as I said, get into next week. Okay, there goes Erin, according to the European ensemble, missing the U.S. And what do we have by a week from now or 8 days from now? More ridging in this area. And so flank, broader ridge. And what I was trying to diagnose is I am expecting this to be a stormy pattern here. But what's going to happen in the Midwest? Now, sometimes we see this pattern, a little shortwaves just work their way over the top and initiate storm clusters that run through this area. We call that northwest flow. We talk about it extensively in June and July. But there's an issue with this particular setup that's starting to show up in the models. The 14-day forecast from today's 0Z European ensemble is still stormy in this area, but look at the dryness it's got farther to the south. Now, this makes sense given the pattern I just showed you, but does this dryness extend into New England, into the Northeast, into Ontario, Quebec? And we see better flow coming into parts of Washington, Oregon, but a lot of Montana is showing up drier. And the model's not as aggressively dry on the monsoon, but it's not wet either. We see Florida drier, and the models are taking Erin over here. Okay, that's the European ensemble. How about the GFS ensemble? Look at the similarities. Let's go back and forth real quick here. They look pretty darn close, meaning that there's a relatively strong signal that we have an area in through here that's going to see a pretty decent dry stretch. Now, some of you are like, bring it on. I think a lot of you in Nebraska that just experienced that big severe wind event and the heavy rain. Most of Iowa, which has been soaked for weeks. All right, we can handle some drier weather. But we are going to be questioning, hey, can we get one more punch of rain to finish off the bean crop, just as an example? What I'm worried about is the peripheral regions, and that means this area to the south of it's been quite dry. Rain's down here. Florida's going over dry after some incredibly heavy rainfall as of late in pockets. But you can kind of see the other areas we discussed. And one last model to look at is the artificial intelligence. And I think the most consistent signal is right here. So watch. This is the AI, GFS, European, GFS, AI. All of them have a drier swath in this area going forward. Now, can it really do that? We have seen models forecast dry weather here, and then it just comes through and it rains. What was interesting, I was talking to a colleague of mine yesterday, if we here at Nutrien, and he said, he goes, you know what I often think about is he goes, his name's Steve, by the way. Steve's like, years when it's really wet and I hear a 40% chance of precipitation. When it's a wet year, I'm like, oh, it's gonna rain. He goes, but years when it's dry and I hear a 40% chance of rain, my head says it's not gonna rain at all. And I said, Steve, that is a common, well understood thing. We call it all signs. All signs fail in times of drought. And I wonder if we can do a little bit of manipulation of those stats with that thinking process. So, Steve, I appreciate you talking about that. But anyways, that's it. That's what the models have. Okay, importance of this. We can see that dryness. Now, this is a 60-day forecast. A 60-day hindcast looking back. We can see that dryness here, the dryness in this region, the extreme dryness in parts of the Northeast, the lack of the monsoon, the dry conditions in the Northwest. But I'm just going to make a point here that where we're seeing the models called dry, we've got some places in here. In fact, I'll just zoom in on the north central U.S. And we're 8 to 10 inches wetter than average just in the last 2 months. And it'd be great if we got 10 inches in 2 months' time, but we're 10 inches wetter than average during that time frame. So I think it's just an important piece to kind of balance out here with the rest of the equation. Okay, so near term, then we'll get into that long term, and I'll shut up finally. We've got better flow coming out of the Gulf of Alaska, which is going to eventually come into the Northwest. Somebody watching precip there. We can see generally high pressure throughout the day today, but we're going to watch what's happening here as this next low spins up and moves its way over through those areas that have been burned so badly. The question is going to be, are we getting much instability into this? So let's flip this over to Cape, and we can see a narrow ribbon later on today of instability getting into this area. Good, we need some storms out of this pattern. And maybe one last thing. What about total precipitable water? We're going to keep an eye on this just as if we do have any good dry intrusions coming in anytime soon. But that means today we're going to watch parts of South Dakota and surrounding states for severe weather. Tomorrow, it'll be up here in the Red River Valley. And as we get into the day here, day 3, we're going to keep an eye again on parts of South Dakota into Minnesota. Excessive rainfall outlook just today. Just keep an eye on this. If you're over in the Appalachian Mountains here of North Carolina, Tennessee, this could be a pretty wet go of it just today. We can see that by just starting off with this morning where it is raining in that area. This is the high-res NAM model. And just later today, chances of storms coming back into those same regions. But you did note that by this afternoon, this evening, the models are dropping in some isolated severe convection into this area, which is why this slight risk is warranted there. Just overall thunderstorms moving through here. Any rain into the northeast is welcome this time of year, given the dryness there. And getting our way into Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon and evening, we do see, there are storms still popping in the mountains, but this is just not the full force monsoon that we could expect to get. Take note, that flow coming through the Gulf of Alaska, by the time we get toward Thursday, look, we got moisture coming into this area. We need to get it there. We have a fire going right now in the Olympic Mountains, so there needs to be some moisture coming in from the atmosphere to put that out. And that system's potent coming in there, so we'll need to watch that carefully. Putting it all together, just keep an eye on this, right? This is through Thursday into Friday. Let's add in the weekend. This is Saturday, Sunday. See the northwest add up? That's Saturday into Sunday. There's our wetter conditions farther to the north, Wisconsin, parts of Minnesota. Yeah, there's drier pockets in here. They could use this. But again, look at the size of that drier region in there. Daily convective events down in the southeast, which we expect this time of year. There goes Erin. Okay, this is next Tuesday, Wednesday. And overall, you play it out 10 days, and I see a few things. There's a drier wedge in here, and it probably extends farther to the east, okay, and all the way back to the mountains. More storms, wetter here, wetter Canadian prairie, moisture finally coming into the northwest. But that hole, let's just come back to it here. We've got to keep an eye on this particular piece of the atmosphere here. Probability-wise, who's driest? Well, this is the 10-day chances staying under a ½ inch. And there you go. That's a little bit easier to see. See it? Right there. And that's that wedge I'm going to keep an eye on, plus parts of the northeast. So we're wetter where there is white on this particular image. Okay, fully into week 2. Take a look at the model differences between the European and the AI. Okay, week 2 precipitation patterns. And here's the GFS, which looks a whole lot more like the European ensemble. I think what's going to happen as we get out into week 2 is to fully assess what the shape of the ridge is, if it is in fact in the west, and there are troughs flanking North America. And I think until we know that, we're not going to be able to make a clear call on this. So at this point, we do know, let's see if we can go back and find it real quick. Of course, I got to click 1,000 times. We do know that 8, 9, 10 days from now, there's lower pressure here. Okay, there's a ridging event there and troughs. And I want to just look at that into week 2 to make some sort of assessment about this precipitation pattern. That's what you tend to get out of it. Now, on the temperature side of it, this is where we've been watching a lot of fluctuation. Here's today's highs. Getting into tomorrow, another hot one up the plains on Thursday. Getting into Friday and Saturday, we see that expand in the midsection of the country. The west is cool yet again. Now remember, it's the West Coast in summer. It's still hot, but this has been a summer we've not seen excessive heat get into the west. By Sunday, it's going to really crank. These temperatures going to get up into the mid-90s in the Midwest, so it's going to be a hot one. But does it last? That's Monday into Tuesday. And if you take a look at the new model runs, there's your next 5 days. Day 5 through 10 tries to back that heat up while we flank North America with troughs. See them? Now, the biggest change is that the model has gone warmer in here in the overnight runs. Yesterday, this was all cool by this time in August, which again, it would be about the 23rd. And now it's significantly warmer. And even as we look out there pretty far, this is all up to day 15. Yesterday's model run, all of this was a shade of blue, representing cooler weather. Now we see it a bit farther to the north. West is going to get a bit of heat wave out of this. Okay. All right, so where do we want to finish this up? I do want to point out that heat that I just mentioned in the west is showing up in NOAA's products as well, and they put out a mod risk for heat the 20th and 21st, and just generally speaking, that week of the 20th, they're going to keep an eye on the heat out west. But what I want to know is this. Newest run from the European ensemble, weeklies all the way out to September 21. So this is the equinox, has gone wetter. And I'm going to come back to something that I want to watch carefully. So let's put this dialogue together and wrap this up. This is really an interesting signal. We are seeing the Gulf, the Bay of Campeche, even the Caribbean, with wetter signals consistently. And we're curious if the model's just picking up on the lower pressure and the potential for making tropical systems, plus it's climatologically consistent with that. And what influence do these have on this whole region? Like that's going to be the question. But the models trended wetter in this area from yesterday. Remember, it was much drier. Matt and I've been showing you these. So I want to do this. Last year, starting in September, we saw a very important event take shape. After spending all of summer, the Bermuda High lived over Bermuda. It split. One piece went here, another piece went there. And this drove tremendous drought into the midsection of the country, shoved the Bermuda High, which is our big steering current for tropical systems, way over here toward the Azores. And look what it did. The flow around it did this, okay? And this became very, very weak and wasn't transporting much moisture. And it shut down the precipitation of the entirety of the Mississippi and Missouri Valley. Maybe another way to look at it is look at anomalous flow. Look at that. It was actually going the wrong direction. But this area calmed down. And that was the region in which we started to see some tropical systems develop. And the worst of which went right through here. That would have been Hurricane Helene's track. Now, we had Milton as well. I'm not discounting that, but I'm just saying that was a very, very interesting event because you go back to that soil moisture value at the beginning of October. So in other words, what happened in September, and what you see is excessive dryness here. And all of this was from Hurricane Helene, creating not just tremendous or epic, but life-altering flooding in the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina. So I want to know, is the Bermuda High going to stay where it's been, which all summer it has been anchored and powerful off of the East Coast? Is it going to drift? That's going to be a narrative we're going to have to talk about over the coming weeks. I'm not really set on what the model suggests is going to happen. In September, the European model says up near normal Bermuda High. See how there's no shading? It's just kind of got normal. You then get into October, and it's stronger farther to the to the east, getting over here toward Europe, and not so strong here. But I don't think you can ever use these models out this far to kind of tell you what that pressure pattern is going to be. But I do want to see the kind of the reflection of that in the precipitation pattern. I just want to show you in September. See the green in here? This model is aggressive on developing tropical moisture in the Gulf, in this part of the Western Atlantic, and even in the Caribbean. And it's still there in October, which means, to bookend this with discussion on hurricanes, are we looking at a season, I'll just go back to last year as an example, where we do get some homegrown activity here and here once we get into the second half of this season? I think it's all going to depend on the Bermuda High position because we do know the ocean temperatures are plenty warm. So we'll just keep the narrative going. Matt, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a good one. Thanks.